Okay, go ahead, Mayor.
Good evening. This is a regular City Commission meeting for the City of Largo for Tuesday, July 7th, 2020. This is a virtual meeting. We're on the Zoom platform, which is somewhat new to us, so please bear with us if there's any technical glitches. But I would like to call this meeting to order and start with an invocation. And it's going to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance given by some children that are family members from part of our team. So please bow your heads. Please give us guidance in our endeavor to work together for the betterment of Largo. Please give us strength, give strength to those suffering from the effects of COVID-19. And please give us all patience as we adopt new practices and learn new technologies as we guide our city. And thank you for all of the wonderful things that make our city great. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda today is a ceremonial item. It's a proclamation for July as Recreation and Parks Month.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I assume you can all hear me all right. Well, this is my favorite month of the year. July is National Parks and Recreation Month. And now more than ever, I hope that Largo residents are enjoying our incredible system of parks as a place where they can exercise, refresh, and safely socialize. While the slogan, as Commissioner Carroll knows, for the Florida Recreation and Parks Association has for many years been, "It starts in parks," I do want to assure you that the current pandemic did not start in parks. In fact, during this time, parks have been a refuge for many when other social outlets have been unavailable. We've known for a long time the restorative power of spending time in nature. But now more and more people are recognizing just how important parks and green spaces are to both our physical and mental health. In recreation, we're busy creating new traditions like the recent July 4th Neighborhood Salute Parade, or the upcoming virtual 5K family race, or the totally redesigned outdoor concert series for the portico of the Performing Arts Center. Our staff are committed to providing engaging and safe ways for everyone in Largo to get out and play. And remember, play in all its many forms keeps us young, keeps us healthy, and keeps us connected. So let's celebrate Parks and Recreation Month by visiting a park or recreation center. We are in this together, and that does start in parks.
Whereas parks and recreation programs enhance the quality of life in Largo by contributing to a healthy lifestyle and protecting the natural environment, and whereas parks, recreation, and arts programs boost the economy, attract new business, and increase tourism, and whereas Largo is home to a rich inventory of park, cultural, and recreation facilities, and whereas the Largo Recreation, Parks, and Arts Department has been nationally and regionally recognized as an agency of excellence providing award-winning facilities and programming, and whereas parks were a refuge for many during the recent pandemic, providing a safe place to enjoy the outdoors and exercise, now therefore, I, Woody Brown, Mayor of the City of Largo, Florida, along with Ron DeSantis, Governor of the State of Florida, and on behalf of the City Commission, do hereby proclaim the month of July 2020 Recreation and Parks Month in the City of Largo and throughout Florida, and encourage all of our citizens to enjoy the many benefits available to them through parks and recreation.
Thank you. And Joan, I'd like to just congratulate your team on such a great job for the parade this past weekend. It was so well attended. It was a lot of fun. The temperature was probably about 5 degrees warmer than we would have liked, but other than that, it was done really well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next item is citizens comment. We do have a couple different ways that folks can comment on things that we're going to talk about tonight, and otherwise I would ask that if there's something that you would like to talk about that's outside of the consent docket, please wait until that item comes up. And I'm going to ask the city clerk if there is citizens' comment at this time.
We received one on the public comment at largo.com email. This is from German Jaramillo. He says, the Clearwater Largo Road Community Redevelopment District Plan was adopted in 2006. The CLR-CD states this plan shall govern the design, development, and use of the land within the boundaries indicated. Policy 2.3.16 requires all utilities in the corridor be placed underground wherever feasible. This is consistent with CDC Section 9100D9. Additionally, above-ground utilities are a negative barrier to redevelopment according to Section 2.8 redevelopment barriers. 4.3C-TIF implementation Section D CLR-CRD projects 1. Burying utilities states utilities are to be placed underground. Why are we now installing poles on private property along Rosary Road Northwest, east of Clearwater Largo Road, with Largo engineering staff quoting non-existent Florida statutes that supposedly allow Duke Energy to install poles on private property? A good solution would have been to bury the electric lines to not impede the installation of the trail extension. We have learned that a portion of the electric lines along Rosary Road Northwest, west of Clearwater Largo Road, were buried because the developer of the new apartment complex put pressure on the Largo commissioners and Duke Energy. Not only are the new poles installed on private property, there haven't been any easements granted to cover the pole installation. City engineers have not yet contacted the homeowners, but the poles remain. Duke Energy staff states the locations of the new poles were made by Largo staff. The Pinellas Trail Extension multi-use path is supposed to run from the Pinellas Trail on the west end to Eagle Lake Park on the east end of Rosary Road. It is supposed to be a 10-foot wide trail. Where there are right-of-way constraints, they can limit the width to 8 feet. The trail drops to 6 feet in front of 451 and 453 Rosary Road Northwest to the CSX Railroad. Under Largo's placemaking principles, number 10 states money is not the issue. In dealing with Largo staff throughout this project, it appears many of the staff are not familiar with the placemaking principles, the CLR-CD, and the Comprehensive Development Code.
Thank you. Is that all the comments?
No, I just got one more email from Matthew Humphreyville. He says, my wife and I would like to go on record in desiring Largo to make masks mandatory following the path of St. Petersburg and Hillsborough County. Those residents, friends of ours that live in those areas feel much more safe due to those mandates. I trust you and the town to do what those higher up are not doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all the comments I have.
And can we check to see if there's anybody that's an attendee on Zoom with their hand raised that might want to make a comment? I assume by the silence that there isn't, so we'll move forward. I would ask the city manager if he could give us a report on the first citizens comment speaker, or the person that sent the email in concerning Rosary Road and placements of power poles. Just a report on what's going on with that. I appreciate it.
Yes, we'll follow up on that.
Thank you. Next is approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Holmes, a second from Vice Mayor Polk. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Next is approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of June 16th, 2020.
So moved.
Commissioner Smith, second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Holmes, a second from Commissioner Smith. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Could I hear the consent docket, please?
Item 4, approval of 2021 co-sponsored events. Item 5, appointment of Leslie Kaplan as a member of the Planning Board. Item 6, appointment of Valerie Hibbert as a member of the Finance Advisory Board. Item 7, approval of post-verdict settlement with David Barr and Joshua Laverso in the amount of $85,000, subject to a full general release being executed in a form approved by the city attorney. Item 8, acceptance of a temporary ingress, egress, and construction easement located at 801 Seminole Boulevard. Item 9, approval to amend the engineering, design, and construction standards, roadway and traffic RT section. Item 10, approval to purchase replacement variable frequency drive number 1 located in the wastewater treatment facility's reclaimed water storage tank pump house from Rexel USA in the amount of $47,857.14. Item 11, award of scope and fee to Kimley Horn and Associates Incorporated for design of CDBG sidewalk improvements project RFQ number 19-Q-666 in the amount of $143,115. Item 12, appointment of Commissioner James Robinson to the Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority Board of Directors for the term which will expire on September 30th, 2021. Item 13, authorization to enter into a support agreement for the city's Cisco phone system with United Data Technologies by way of Florida State Contract number 43220000-WSCA-14-ACS for $149,855 for 5 years. Item 14, designation of a voting delegate for the Florida League of Cities 94th Annual Conference to be held in Orlando, Florida, August 13th through the 14th, 2020.
You've heard the consent docket. I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve the consent docket without commission discussion as outlined in the commission packets.
Commissioner Smith, second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. I'd like to take a moment to thank Ms. Leslie Kaplan and Valerie Hibbard for volunteering to serve on advisory boards. We certainly appreciate your dedication to the city and thank you for stepping up to volunteer on one of our boards. Next up is item number 15.
Good evening. This is the second and final reading of ordinance number 2020-09. I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, if we can't get that to work, I will keep going.
You want this?
I'm good.
Commissioner Holmes, you asked for less.
This is a future land use map amendment for a property located at the southeast corner of East Bay Drive and Highland Avenue, just south of the racetrack gas station property. I had a map that I was going to share. Still, oh, now it's working. Great. Okay. Here we go. You should be able to see in a second that just the location of the property. Okay. So this is the location which is requesting an amendment to the city's future land use map from recreation open space to industrial limited. On December 5th, Planning Board approved the ordinance, December 5th, 2019. And on January 21st, 2020, the City Commission approved this amendment concurrently with the development agreement DA 19-001. And the CPA approved the map amendment on June 2nd, 2020. There have been no changes since first reading, and staff is seeking approval of ordinance 2020-09 on second and final reading and is available for questions. In addition, the applicant's legal representative may be on the line if there's further questions.
Ordinance number 2020-09, an ordinance of the City of Largo, Florida, amending the City of Largo Comprehensive Plan Future Land Use Map classification of the within described tracts of land located at southeast corner of East Bay Drive and Highland Avenue Southeast from recreation open space, parentheses R/OS, to industrial limited, parentheses IL, consistent with the City of Largo Comprehensive Plan, amending the city future land use map on file in the office of the city clerk pursuant to the provisions of Chapter 163, Part 2, Florida statutes and the Pinellas Countywide Plan rules, providing for severability and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do we have any public comments on this item?
Let me check the attendees. I've got one hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Ms.
Hi, thank you. This is Katie Cole, the attorney for the applicant, HUP Retail, and we appreciate the opportunity to be with you all tonight for this virtual hearing. I know it has taken some adjustments for everybody to get together online, so thank you for that. As this staff report indicates, and as you all have seen for quite some time, this is the last of several hearings with respect to this. The development agreement was approved previously and recorded on March 11th of this year in the public records. And so this is the second and final hearing before you all to adopt the land use map amendment, which will memorialize and make effective the development agreement. So I don't want to belabor anything because you all have heard this often and a lot about it, but I do want to offer our appreciation to the staff and to the commission for working through what is sure to be really a nice development on this site. It has significant buffers, it has significant architectural benefits, and really is something that I think you can be happy with. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know there were questions about the timeline and the termination of the agreement previously. This is to confirm that the agreement includes in section 14.1, or excuse me, 13.3, obligation for the developer to complete the construction within 10 years of the effective date. And if the agreement is not fulfilled, then it can be terminated by the city. And there is a reverter provision to take the land use back to what it previously was. So I know those were some of your concerns that I wanted to confirm. So please let me know if you have any questions. Pete Pensa with Avid Engineering is also on the line to answer any of the technical questions with respect to the buffers and the landscaping obligations. Mr. Andrew Hupp, who is the owner of the property as well, is on the line and registered. So please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Does any of the commission have any questions for Ms. Cole, Mr. Hupp, or Mr. Pensa?
Commissioner Smith, I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
More probably for staff, when this does start development, I'd like to take in that I would like the preserve not to be cut off. So to be open to the public during this development, if there's a way.
Thank you. We'll make a note of that, and just keep that on our radar. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Any other questions from the commission?
I move to adopt ordinance number 2020-09 on second and final reading.
Commissioner Carroll, second.
And Commissioner Fenger, I believe, had a question.
I did. Thank you. Just looking at the item, the report that we received, I don't believe we had previous city actions on January 21st, and it reads that it was 7-0. I know that I've been the only person who has voted nay on moving forward with this development agreement. So if we could check on that, I would appreciate it. And I would still, because I would have the same comments today as I have had previously regarding this property and the change and moving forward with the change in land use. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We can look at that. Staff will take a look and check that and get it corrected.
Thank you. I do have a motion and a second. If we could all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? And I think Commissioner Fenger may have insinuated that she was going to vote in opposition, but she froze on the screen. Commissioner Fenger, are you?
You're right. You're correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so motion passes 6-1.
I'm a no.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next is item number 16, which is ordinance number 2020-30.
But I am here for the second and final reading of ordinance 2020-30, which will amend the Code of Ordinance, Chapter 23, to enact the dental amalgam rule and the hazardous pharmaceutical waste prohibition rules as promulgated by the EPA and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. So there have been no changes since the last meeting, and we would ask that the commission would approve this adoption.
Ordinance number 2020-30, an ordinance of the City of Largo, Florida, amending the City of Largo Code of Ordinances by amending Section 23-117F, Section 23-118B, and enacting Section 23-118P to establish regulations for dental and amalgam and pharmaceutical hazardous waste, providing for severability and providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on this item?
I don't believe I have any hands up. No, I have none.
Very good. Do we have any questions from the commission?
I move to adopt ordinance number 2020-30 on second and final reading.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Holmes and a second from Commissioner Robinson. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Next is item number 17, which is ordinance number 2020-33.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Commissioners. This is the second reading of ordinance number 2020-33, which is an amendment to Chapter 20, the solid waste section of the City Code of Ordinances. This amendment prevents solid waste containers from interfering with drainage, vehicular, pedestrian traffic by making sure that solid waste cans are not placed on sidewalks, driveways, streets, or alleyways. There's been no changes since the first reading. The first reading was approved by the Commission on June 16th, 2020 by a vote of 7-0. I am happy to answer any questions.
Ordinance number 2020-33, an ordinance of the City of Largo, Florida, amending the City of Largo Code of Ordinances, Chapter 20, Solid Waste, Article 3, Placement of Waste, by amending Section 20-71, Placement of Containers, subsection A, to prevent solid waste containers from being placed in any manner which would interfere with drainage, vehicles, or pedestrians, providing for severability, providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do we have any cards on this? Any public comment?
I have no hands up and no emails.
Thank you. I did have a question on first reading. We had some discussion about areas of the city where the sidewalk is right up against the roadway and how far the trucks could reach because if somebody's putting their trash can, which covers the entire sidewalk on the roadway for the truck, they'd be in violation of this ordinance.
Yes, Mayor. The Solid Waste Division has two generations of side-loading solid waste vehicles. One has a reach of 9 feet and the other has a reach of 14 feet. So in theory, they could put their cans.
You could almost leave them by the house.
Almost, if it's the new generation of the side-loading vehicle.
Okay, thank you. That was a big concern for me, and I think that moving forward, we should make an effort to educate the people that live in those areas that they can leave the can on the grass to leave the sidewalk open. Education as opposed to enforcement early on.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, Commissioner? Yes. Commissioner Holmes.
Jerry, I've just got an easy question on both 17 and 18. Who's going to enforce this?
It would be the Community Standards Division and or the education process from the Solid Waste Division, just like any other code of ordinances in the city.
And we do have somebody with community standards that works directly with solid waste folks for these type of things. People putting stuff that's not recyclable in the recycling bins and that type of stuff.
No, I'm glad to see this. I'm glad to see both of them, but it's a matter, if you're going to pass an ordinance, you got to have some enforcement vehicle behind it. And there's a lot of the stuff we passed and there's no enforcement behind it. So we'll see how it works out, but I'm glad to see it though. Thank you. I move to adopt ordinance number 2020-33 on second and final reading.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Holmes, second from Commissioner Carroll. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. And next is ordinance 2020-34.
And this is a second reading of ordinance number 2020-34, which is an amendment to Chapter 21, Streets, Sidewalks, and Other Public Places. Again, similar amendment to ensure for ADA and pedestrian purposes that if the right-of-way any of the right-of-way in the city of Largo should be under construction or blocked, that either a safe ADA compliant pathway is provided through the construction zone or a safe compliant detour in the pedestrian right-of-way is provided around the construction zone. There are no changes from the first reading. The first reading was approved on June 16th, 2020 by the City Commission at a vote of 7-0. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Ordinance number 2020-34, an ordinance of the City of Largo, Florida, amending the City of Largo Code of Ordinances, Chapter 21, Streets, Sidewalks, and Other Public Places, Article 4, Right-of-Way Utilization, Division 1, generally, by adding Section 21-80 to ensure any right-of-way closures are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act, providing for severability, providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Checking hands up, and no, we have none.
And do we have any questions from the commission? Commissioner Holmes.
Hey, Jerry, you know, if we had to pass this thing some time ago, Rosary Road right now, we'd be in violation of our own ordinance because you can't get down Rosary Road on foot, much less on a bicycle or a wheelchair or anything else. And again, we have another ordinance here. Where's the enforcement? Because there was no viable way to get around the second part of Rosary Road between Clearwater Largo Road and Missouri. It was that beat up. The sidewalks were removed, the roadway was removed, and you had a block wall on both sides. So this may happen again with a lot of the construction we're doing. So I really I'm in favor of this thing, but I think there may be some issues involved with compliance because there was if someone was on a wheelchair with Rosary, you either had to go down to West Bay Drive or you had to go up to Ponce de Leon, I believe it is. That was your two choices, which is a long way away. But anyway.
Yes, sir. And that's why with our community outreach, in theory, we would encourage those folks to have an alternate means other than using that sidewalk. The challenge with the American with Disabilities Act, it doesn't compel us to put in sidewalk. It compels us to maintain the sidewalk we do have. And of course, exactly scenarios like this, like you mentioned, do come along.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I move to adopt ordinance number 2020-34 on second and final reading.
Second.
Commissioner Smith, second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Holmes and a second with Commissioner Smith. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Next is item number 19. Ordinance number 2020-38.
Good evening, Mayor Brown and honored city commissioners. This item is the second and final reading of ordinance 2020-38, a budget amendment in the amount of $330,000 in the Community Development Department's Community Development Block Grant Fund and $419,000 in the Community Development Department's State Housing Initiatives Partnership Fund for additional program revenues and expenditures. This item was approved on first reading on June 16th, and there have been no changes since. Staff is available and happy to answer any questions on this item.
Ordinance number 2020-38, an ordinance of the City of Largo, Florida, amending the fiscal year 2020 budget adopted by resolution number 2224 by appropriating revenues and expenditures in the amount of $330,000 within the Community Development Department CDBG Fund and $419,000 within the Community Development SHIP Department Fund for additional program expenditures, providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do we have any public input on this?
Checking hands up. I have none.
And any questions from the commission?
I move to adopt ordinance number 2020-38 on second and final reading.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Holmes, a second, Mr. Robinson. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 20, ordinance number 2020-35.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. This is the first reading of ordinance 2020-35. Ordinance 2020-35 is a budget amendment that appropriates an additional $80,000 in the IT department budget for additional Workday training. As we've embarked on the Workday Enterprise Resource Planning software project over the past few months, we have discussed often how training is an essential part of any successful software implementation. As we've gone through what's known as the architect phase with our implementation consultants, Collaborative Solutions, it's been identified that our desire and expectation for broad end user training is greater than the existing that we have. This budget amendment would support a forthcoming change order with Collaborative Solutions to our scope of work to add more end user training for Go Live beyond all of the key primary users to support more city staff who will all be affected by the software to get training in partnership with Collaborative Solutions. This budget amendment is actually going to be a budget transfer as COVID-19 has impacted our travel budgets for this year and reduced some of our travel plans. Based on our year-end expenditure projections, we think this could be accommodated with existing funds. So this would actually be a formal budget transfer into the IT department's budget from existing budget appropriations. And staff's available for any questions.
Ordinance number 2020-35, an ordinance of the City of Largo, Florida, amending the fiscal year 2020 budget adopted by resolution number 2224 by appropriating expenditures in the amount of $80,000 within the Information Technology Department Enterprise Technology Capital Fund for additional training and consulting services for the Workday Enterprise Resource Planning software project, providing for an effective date.
Thank you. Do we have any public input on this?
No, we do not.
And any questions from the commission? Commissioner Holmes.
Hey, Will, when we first approved this project, this was one of my very specific questions, was about the training. And I said, when we bought this thing, the price that we paid for it, it was supposed to be all inclusive, that this was the training and everything. And when I read this thing, I said, are you kidding me? You gave a great presentation, but that was justifying spending this money. This doesn't go back to the principal question that was asked when we first did this. Did the price we pay include all of this? And apparently it does not, which really, you know, we're spending tax money here. These are the people's money, and we're supposed to be, you know, we have a fiduciary responsibility here. And also, well, we're just going to fork out an extra $80,000 on something that theoretically was included when we first bought it. Does not make me a happy camper. But you gave a great justification.
Certainly. I will say we do have training included in the existing scope of work when the project was approved. I think when we got into the depth of the architect sessions, and I'll have to let IT maybe speak a little bit more about that when the change order comes. But once we really got into things, that's where we identified the need for some training beyond what we had in the contract and in the existing scope when we started.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Commissioner Smith, I have a question.
Sure. Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
Could in the future we could keep a running log of what we're spending on this so we know exactly kind of what Commissioner Holmes had said, that we need to keep it under control. So that's all I ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
I move to disapprove ordinance number 2020-35 on first reading and schedule a second reading and public hearing on July 21, 2020.
I have a motion to disapprove. Any second on that motion?
Mayor, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Will, how many people do you plan additionally to be able to train with this extra expenditure?
I don't have the specific numbers for all of that. I'd have to get that from IT, and we could provide that to you.
Okay.
And let me just jump in. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Just real quick, Henry. Do you know, Will, or maybe somebody on the call knows what we originally had planned for, how many people we had originally planned in the original scope?
So I can speak to a little bit of it, which is within the scope, they had direct training planned for a lot of the really intensive users, IT, HR, finance, administration, a lot of those folks. But because it's a product that's going to touch on office administrators and staff in every department, there was a plan for more of a train the trainer approach, like you'll find in a lot of software implementations. As we got into it more, that's where we decided we wanted to actually work with Collaborative Solutions for some direct go live training with that broader subset of city employees before we're doing the training ourselves after that.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what I was trying to get to. So you know, in our initial scope, we kind of had an idea. Okay, we're going to have a certain group of people that we're going to have, and then those people are going to go and try to train our people, correct? And once we started getting into it a little bit, we realized that we need to have more in-depth training for people who are going to be using this day to day. And this is a very expansive program that we're going to be using in multiple different departments with probably hundreds of different people going to have hands-on on this. So, I mean, in my mind, and I understand Commissioner Holmes' questioning of the expenditure, but I think it can be validated by, you know, us having an extra look at it and seeing that once this expenditure or project was looked at and we had a little more in depth into it. I think it makes a little sense. So thank you.
Mayor?
Absolutely, sure.
I would just kind of like to echo what Commissioner Holmes said. I think we're fortunate that we have funds available to kind of move to cover this training. Training is very important. If the system's going to work properly, we're going to have to train the right people. But in the future, I would like a little bit better, more accurate estimate of what it's going to cost us. Like I say, we're lucky that we have, you know, unexpended training money available. Otherwise, we'd be having much more discussion.
Yeah, for second reading, perhaps we could take a look at the training that was involved in the initial expenditure and what type of training this $80,000 is getting us and how that differs from the initial training allotment. I think that the justification is there. It seems like it's a reasonable expense, but if you could break it down on what we spent initially, what that money was spent for, and what this money is going to be spent for.
Absolutely. I'll talk with IT, and I think that'll be probably part of that change order that would go along with the second reading, is the detail of what's included in that change order.
Very good. I did have a motion. It failed for lack of a second. Is there anybody else that would like to make another motion?
I move to... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I move to approve ordinance number 2020-35 on first reading and schedule a second reading and public hearing on July 21st, 2020.
Commissioner Smith, second.
Second.
I have a motion and a couple seconds, I believe. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
Motion passes 6-1. Thank you, Will. Next is staff reports. From the Charter Review Committee.
So this is a report with regard to the results of the work of the Charter Review Committee that the Commission established by resolution on January 21st of this year, pursuant to Section 902 of the City Charter. During the course over the past few months, the Charter Review Committee has met 5 times. We reviewed the charter, reviewed input from city staff, from the unions that represent the city employees, from the public, and discussed among themselves the charter and proposed changes that they suggested. Their last meeting, they adopted the final report, which is included in your backup, proposing 3 charter amendments to be presented to the voters in November. I do, on the call today, or on the Zoom meeting today, is Chairperson Beverly Gatewood, and she's available to answer questions. Another member I know was going to join, Mr. Ernie Bach, and he wanted to speak to one of the proposed changes. And I know that I see that there are other members who have joined the Zoom meeting. I have not seen that Mr. Bach has joined the meeting, and I don't know if he's in attendance at City Hall at the city laptop that's available. But I did want to point that out. The 3 proposed changes are the following. Number 1, in section 2.01 of the city charter, there's a new provision that's proposed that would establish term limits for the mayor and the city commissioners. Generally, what it would do is limit each elected official to 2 full terms as a city commissioner, and then you could serve 2 full terms as a mayor. You would have to sit out 1 4-year term before you could come back and run again. So if you were a city commissioner and served 2 full terms, then, and you didn't want to run for mayor, you would have to sit out 4 years before you could run for commissioner again. The term limits would start with the people who are elected beginning this November. So it wouldn't apply retroactively. It doesn't apply to anybody on the call right now, except if you got reelected going forward. The other thing it doesn't apply to is somebody who's appointed for a partial term. So if there was a vacancy created and somebody got appointed for less than the full 4 years, they would still be able to serve 2 full-year terms after that if they wish to do so. And again, as I mentioned, the members, Beverly and the other members, Beverly Gatewood and the other members of the committee that discuss the term limits at some length can, if the commission wishes, discuss in greater detail as to the reasoning why they're suggesting that the city adopt term limits. The city clerk had performed a survey of all the other cities in Pinellas County with regard to their provisions on term limits, and that was shared with you this afternoon. So you should have that available to you as well. The second change that they propose is in section 2.12 of the city charter. You might recall, some of you, that we had proposed, that the last Charter Review Committee had proposed and the commission put on the ballot, a proposed change of the same section. This is a section that requires the city to obtain referendum approval for any lease of city property that's greater than 5 years. Back in 2014, the Charter Review Committee had proposed increasing that to 10 years. That didn't pass. This Charter Review Committee is suggesting that we go back to the voters and ask them to increase it to 7 years. And from a staff perspective, I think one of the big areas that we really deal with this is when we are leasing portions of city property for cell towers. Because of the infrastructure costs involved, they like longer leases than 5-year leases. And then lastly, section 9.02, they propose to revise a section that relates to the Charter Review Committee. If just a little history on this, so when I first started with the city as being city attorney, we convened, I believe it was the first charter review committee in over 20 or 30 years. So it was an extensive review of the charter. Then when we convened the second charter review committee during my time as city attorney in 2013, it was still a pretty extensive review because there was certain things that, we had to go back and look at again that we had looked back to the first go around. So it was still a pretty in-depth review. And I think the Charter Review Committee this time felt that it didn't really need to be reviewed so quickly in 7 years, and that not that much has changed. So they're suggesting that a Charter Review Committee be convened every 10 years instead of every 7 years. And that's their proposed change to section 9.02. What we're looking for from the commission tonight is direction as to which of these proposed changes you want to put on the ballot for the voters to consider in November. Time frame wise, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm really looking for that direction tonight. We have to adopt an ordinance in order to put any questions before the voters, and that ordinance has to be adopted with the ballot language by your first meeting in August, would be the last meeting that we have. So I need to have an ordinance on your agenda for the 21st. And then second reading in the first meeting of August in order to meet the supervisor of elections deadlines for the ballot. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them from either a procedural standpoint, or if you have questions as to the intent or reasoning of the Charter Review Committee, like I said, there's members, including the chairperson, Beverly Gatewood, that are on the Zoom meeting.
Thank you. I'd like to first thank the members of the Charter Review Committee. I know several of them are with us tonight, including the chairperson, Beverly Gatewood. I'm going to read the names of the Charter Review Committee members: Melissa Honeycutt, Maria Cato, Brett Shortridge, Julie Daniels, Neil McMullen, Ernest Bach, and then alternates were Daniel Ruffner and Roland Johnson. Several of those folks are here with us today, and I'd like to thank you for the time that you put in reviewing our charter and suggesting these changes. And if she's okay with it, I'd like to ask Ms. Gatewood to talk a little bit about the experience and just tell us a little bit about the discussion that you guys had when it concerns the charter.
Yeah, I'd like to thank the commissioners for giving me the opportunity to come before you to speak.
I don't know if everybody else can hear you, but I'm having trouble hearing you, Beverly.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was saying I'd like to thank the commissioners for giving me the opportunity to come before you to speak on the Charter Review Board's advocating for the term limit proposal. Board members had many full discussions about term limits. We agreed that the city of Largo is a city that is becoming more progressive, and now is the time of fresh new ideas to move the city toward a more diverse city. I have been a resident since 1993, and I've seen its growth. However, the minority residents in the community, it appears this commission board is not servicing their needs. I've talked to the residents who are members of my church and the community who feel the city has not considered their needs when their voices are not heard when it comes to issues of critical importance to them. With term limits in place, maybe this commissioner board will attract citizens of diverse backgrounds to become more members that will allow for fresh new ideas to serve all in the city of Largo. That's what we discussed. But I also have information from my co-chair, Maria Cato, had to get off the line. She had something she had to do, but she asked me to convey her thoughts about what we discussed during our charter review.
Well, thank you.
I'm ready. Would you like me to read her statement?
Oh, please. I'm still having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I think I got most of what you were saying, but it seems like your microphone may not be.
Well, it's up as high as it can go, Mayor.
Okay, that's fine. I just had to turn my volume way up. We're good.
Anyone else have issues hearing me?
I'm having a very hard time hearing what Ms. Gatewood is saying.
I can't hear you either.
If you could go.
The volume is real low. That's what I'm saying.
Go ahead and read Miss Cato's comments.
I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that, Mayor?
Yes, please. If you have Miss Cato's comments and you'd like to read those, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, I am Marie Cato, and I am the Vice Chair of the 2020 Charter Review Committee. We are bringing you 3 topics for consideration tonight. First, second are generally non-controversial. However, the third topic, term limit, is and that is what I would like to make a comment for tonight. I'm actually neither for nor against term limits. I do not have a strong or passionate stance one way or another. Some of our committee members did have very strong opinions, which was very evident. What I am for is the right of citizens to determine their own choice view on this subject. I don't think that should be taken away from them by commission voting down the opportunity. It should be noted that we were told by Alan that every charter review committee has brought up term limits for consideration. The topic has moved forward to go to commissioner vote, and each time has failed. Just to have that knowledge should tell you something. It should tell you that the members of the charter review committee each time felt this was an important issue that should be brought to the voters. We are so fortunate in our city not to have the strife and fighting and division that several nearby municipalities have in recent years. We are very lucky to have a functioning, responsible body who by and large get along and most people are happy with. With that said, none of us are bringing this matter with any ill will to the current set of placeholders on the commission. I say allow the subject on the ballot in November. Over these next few months, educate your constituents on how you feel about term limits, and let's see what happens. At least lawyers will, it had a choice versus the opportunity taken away from them. That was from Marie Cato. And I also understand that Mr. Ernie Bach wanted to speak, and he was telling me that he was going to be at City Hall to give his presentation. I don't know if he's available to do that.
All right, thank you. I know that the city clerk is at City Hall, and we'll see if Mr. Bach is there. Thank you for your comments. Diane, is Mr. Bach, are there any other comments from anybody on the committee? Hearing none, I'll move to the City Commission. I think if we have the list of recommended changes, I'd like to talk a little bit about the leases first, and then we can talk about the Charter Review Committee schedule, and then we can end with term limits. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the lease, the 7-year lease instead of 5 years? Commissioner Smith, please.
Alan, that's mainly like you were saying, like telephone companies and stuff, power companies.
Yeah, we don't really lease city property very often, but we do have, there are cell towers located on various city facilities, Public Works and some other places, and they cringe at a 5-year lease because, they're putting in infrastructure. And these are money makers for the city. We get paid for these leases. So we tried last time to increase it to 10 years. This was generated by staff. This was a staff request. So we're hoping that maybe the voters would approve 7 years. Just makes us more competitive and for cell tower locations. And since they're just money makers, and usually they take up a portion of property that otherwise does not disrupt city facilities, there's really little reason not to do this. Not to do cell tower leases.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does this also apply to like the cafe and the library? Is that a lease?
No, we have those as use agreements.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Any other questions? Commissioner Hulk.
A comment. I think this makes great sense, and I this is a good idea. The longer term also. Just wanted to add that.
Thank you. To be clear, Mr. Zimmett, I believe you said that did this go to a referendum at one point with a longer period of time?
Yeah, so in 2014, it went to the voters proposing to increase it to 10 years, and it got voted down.
Okay. Any other questions from the commission or comments?
Commissioner Smith, I just came up with one. What was the vote on that one?
I was going to ask that night. Diane, do you have those numbers handy?
Not handy, but I will look.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Holt.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so the technology maybe now is a little bit better now as far as getting the word out there. Possibly a lot of people did not quite understand what that was pertaining to. So maybe with this vote, educate more on the benefits of it, as Mr. Zimmett said, that it is monetarily beneficial to the city, and a lot of, the benefits are greater. So by educating people when these are on the ballot might be the key to passing that this time.
Yeah, good point. Any other questions? Commissioner Finger.
Thank you. It's more, it's about all of these, just so we know going into this, is that it would, if all of the individuals who are up for re-election this year, if they go unopposed, then it would be similar to what happened just a couple of years ago, where we wouldn't have an election technically, as in Diane doesn't have to get that information over. We don't have to pay for that information to go over to the supervisor elections office. Is that correct?
Right, but just so we're clear, if you're asking this as it relates to term limits, if you...
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just asking in general as far as having items on a ballot.
So there's an election in November, countywide for other purposes. So we can put referendum questions on that ballot, even if there's no commissioners on the ballot.
Okay, and does it cost us per amendment, or is it no cost? How does that work?
Diane, can you speak to that?
Yes. Our estimated cost really wouldn't change based on whether there's candidates or not. It's how much space we take up on the ballot. I believe our cost estimate for 2020 election is about $6,000. If we were in a situation where even if we only had the questions, we caused the ballot to become one page longer, we would be charged for the extra ballot page and all the costs that go with that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions concerning the extending the lease term? Is there any opposition? Commissioner Holmes, looks like either you're thinking or you had a question. And you're on mute.
Alan, why didn't they just go to 10 years on the leases? What's the significance of 7? We'll just go to 10.
They went to 7 because 10 failed in 2014. So the thought was maybe if we proposed a shorter term to the voters.
Well, if they didn't understand 10, they're not going to understand 7. So if it was up to me, I'd just go for 10 again. See if you get lucky.
I don't know if it was that they didn't understand it. You know, we took it that they didn't like it, that it was too long. I mean, that was the discussion at the committee meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments concerning?
And just to, it might help the commission in the discussion if Diane, if you're able to find that vote on that.
I'm looking now. I have the votes, but I don't have the questions to go with it. I could provide it in the manager's report this week or upon first reading of the ordinance.
That's fine.
Good. Do I see any opposition to this one going forward? Okay, good. And next, providing charter review committees shall convene every 10 years instead of every 7 years. That's a good idea. I don't know if anybody has any other questions or comments concerning that.
Mayor, I had a question. The way I read this, Alan, it doesn't preclude the commission either for circumstances or for public outcry to do something sooner than that if necessary, right?
Well, yeah, first of all, the commission, even without a charter review committee, can always put something on the ballot and call an election if there was a reason that you didn't want to wait 10 years. And the commission has done that with the change in the terms when we went to 4 years and then went to move the election to November. And when the commission did that on their own.
Well, you know, playing off of what Commissioner Smith and others have said, I would just say that's part of the education process. So citizens don't think that this thing, the charter doesn't get looked at on a regular basis and we have to wait 10 years for any changes.
Right. This is just a we'll do a comprehensive review every 10 years.
So any opposition to moving that 7 years to 10 years? Okay, looks like that's a good idea. So moving on to the last item, which is section 2.01, establishing term limits. Does anybody have any questions concerning that? Or any comments?
I have never been in favor of term limits, never. Because the only thing you're doing with term limits is you're empowering the bureaucracy. That's all you're doing. I mean, realistically, if you put term limits in there, let's say you have an election and you don't have any, you've got people that are terming out and nobody has filed to run. What are you going to do?
Well, Mr. Holmes, we discussed that. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We discussed that. And I think, you know, now is the time, you know, fresh ideas, you know, I'm looking at this board. There's no diversity on that board. And I'm not saying everybody on this board is going to be voted out. But, you know, I feel like we need to give other people, citizens, residents in the community, a chance to sit on that board. Me, myself, I like to sit on this board one day. And I would like to have the opportunity to do that. But the way things are going, as far as money trying to run for a commissioner, you know, that's keeping a lot of people from wanting to sit on this board because the stakes are so high. And it's just, you know, time for fresh ideas. That's all I'm saying. We're not saying everybody's going to be voted out at the same time. It's going to be, it's going to, just enhance this board with fresh ideas.
Well, no,
that's all I'm saying.
I want to point out something. In the last election, you had 4 people up for re-election. Nobody was challenged. Nobody filed to run against any of them. In our current election coming up, you've got 3 people up. There's only one of them that's drawn an opponent. The other 2 have no opponents. So I'm just saying that the term limit arguments, as far as diversity is concerned, anybody can file to run for office. There's nothing to preclude you from doing it. But when you had an election 2 years ago, you had 4 seats up, and they were all unopposed, so we didn't even have an election. So I mean, that's the whole point. The term limits aren't going to change that. All the term limits are going to do is all of a sudden you're going to have an empty seat up there, and somebody's going to have to fill it. And you see, you can get on these things for the cheap. The first time I ever ran for election, I spent very little money on it. Of course, Woody beat me though.
But now it costs so much. It costs so much now to run for election, to run for anything. And we had that discussion about the cost that it is to run. You have to raise so much money to get a chance to sit on that board. And some people don't have that kind of influence. Some of y'all been on this board for years. Like I said, I've been a resident since '93. And you all have, your people out there, but somebody like me, I don't have the means. I mean, it's a certain amount that I have to come up with, but the stakes are so high just to run for commissioner. That's the thing. The stakes, it costs so much to sit on this board. And that was one of our main things that we talked about.
But hold on, that's fundamentally not true. The only cost factor that you have involved is getting your petition cards counted. And it's 10 cents a card, because I just paid the $21 to get mine counted. You got to have 200 petition cards. If you want to run an advertising campaign, you have to pay for that yourself. You don't want to run an advertising campaign, you go knock on doors. That's free. So,
but it's still going. You advertising everything.
No,
I've talked to Mr. Ernie. See, that's what I'm talking about. You don't want to hear what I have to say, Mr. Holmes.
Ms. Gatewood, I think that we certainly are engaged in what you have to say, and I think it's an important conversation. But I do agree with Commissioner Holmes that the amount of money that's required is not as much as we see raised in some races right now. While when I ran for city commission initially, it was to represent a group of people that I didn't feel was represented, and I think it's an important thing that everybody has an opportunity to run. I don't think that doesn't exist. I think anybody has an opportunity to run and represent the city. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about term limits amongst the commission. I think it's an important conversation, and as was stated, this resolution, if it went to the voters and was passed, it wouldn't affect anyone that's sitting here. It wouldn't limit us from serving. It wouldn't retroactively limit any of us. It certainly, I highly doubt it would ever affect. I'll be gone within the time that this would affect me, I would think. So I think that some of the comments that Commissioner Holmes made were kind of spot on as far as a representation, as far as opportunity. I think 3 of the people that are sitting on this board beat incumbents, if I'm not mistaken. So when I ran initially, I ran in an open seat, and it was the person the person was leaving the commission, and I ran for that seat. Sometimes open seats happen, not often, and oftentimes we have a lot of people run for open seats, and oftentimes when we have people run against incumbents, half the time they win. And so I think that, in my opinion, elections are term limits here in the city of Largo. When most people talk about term limits, most people support term limits if you talk to folks across the city, and it's because they're thinking of Congress. They're thinking of levels of government that make a heck of a lot more money than we make as a city commission or a mayor. and folks stay there forever. And there's a lot of opposition to that, and that's completely understood. I think if this resolution was put on the ballot, it would pass in spite of the good things that we're doing here as a city commission, in spite of the opportunities that people have here in the city of Largo to run for city commission. We don't get paid a whole lot. It's not a job that I, I'm not making money at this. I'm losing money at this. It's, I do it because I like it, and I think we're doing some good things, and we're making changes. There wasn't somebody like me on the commission when I ran, meaning there wasn't a young person that was starting a family. It was probably a small businessman, or a business person, but there wasn't somebody that had a brick and mortar small business in the city of Largo. And all those things were reasons that inspired me to run for city commission. I didn't raise a ton of money. Neither did my opponent, who's sitting right over there now, or that way. I'm not sure which direction it is. But it was something that I did because I thought I could make a change. And I think that exists still in this city, where somebody that wants to make a change and do a good job, regardless of their background or what zip code they live in, can still do that. I think that's important to preserve. So does anybody else have any questions or comments concerning that?
This is Roland. I have a question.
Roland, sure, go ahead.
You said that I don't know the process. So we're talking about term limits on one hand. The way it is now, I guess my question would be, there's an election every so many years, and if somebody decides to run against somebody, they can, or how does that work?
Certainly. We have every 2 years there's an election, and this year there's 3 seats that are up for election, and in 2 years there'll be 4 seats that are up for election. And assuming that nobody leaves midterm, because sometimes we'll have an election if somebody has to leave for one reason or another. Certainly if somebody gets a job transfer and they move out of state, they're going to stop being a city commissioner and their seat's going to become available. If that's the case, we would potentially fill that seat for a period of time, and then there might be a special election. But in normal times, there's going to be an election every 2 years, either for 3 seats or for 4 seats. This year it's for 3 seats. And anybody that is a registered voter that lives in the city of Largo, that has so for a year or was annexed within the last year, can run for that seat. To run for the seat, you have to fill out a little bit of paperwork, and you have to get 200 petition cards signed. And then you have to pay for the validation of those petition cards, which is, as Commissioner Holmes pointed out, 10 cents a card. So it's around $20. That's it. Once you qualify to run for that seat, then you have to pay, I think it's 1% of the annual salary of the position that you're running for. So for a city commissioner, it would be $130, $140, somewhere in that ballpark. And for mayor, it'd be $200, $220. And then you run for election. I know people have been elected in this city since I've been paying attention by raising less than $3,000. I know that there's numbers that are much bigger than that, where people are raising and have raised, and that's certainly up to them. So the last election, where there were 4 seats up for election, all 4 of those seats were unopposed. If somebody would have been term limited, I'm not sure if I don't know exactly when commissioners were elected, so I'm not sure if somebody would have been term limited. My opinion is that somebody would have run for that seat that wasn't otherwise motivated to run. They didn't want to run bad enough to have an election or to have a competition or to run against somebody, but they would jump at an open seat. And I say this having jumped at an open seat, but I think it's important to, and that's the way it works, Roland. Sorry, I kind of rambled there for a little bit. So in order to run, you have to be an a registered voter that lives in the city or was annexed in the city within the last year. Commissioner Smith.
Oh, Roland.
Mr. Dawson, yes.
Okay, that explains it. So every 2 to 4 years, there is an opportunity for a person to run for office.
Correct.
Or one of the positions.
Correct. Every 2 years,
right. Okay.
There are seats that are up for election.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That answers my question.
And as I said earlier, since I've been paying attention, which has been a little while now, the incumbent has lost about 50% of the time. So I don't think there's a real, in Congress, because of, in my opinion, because of big party politics and kind of the things that happen in the federal government position, Congress, if you want to stay, you're likely going to stay. Here, you have to be doing a good job. If people are ready for a change in the seat, you're probably going to move along and somebody new is going to be here. 3 of the people up here beat incumbents and are doing a good job and changed the face of this city or the city commission. And it's, this city commission has been dynamic. Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
Roland, if you could reach out to Gloria, my assistant, and ask her for my cell phone, I'll have prepared for her, knowing that you're going to ask. I would love to meet with you to talk about how to run for office. I try to reach out to people that are interested in running to let them know what it takes. I've been very active in liking, people to know what it takes and what the job entails. So if you can reach out to her, I would love to talk with you more.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'll do that.
Okay.
All right.
Also,
thank you.
No problem, pleasure. And to say what the mayor said, I ran against an incumbent who had been here for 18 plus years, and I'm the openly gay candidate on this commission. My commissioners have been very welcoming, and it does take a lot of to run against an incumbent, but right. Getting out to the citizens, it does take a lot of effort, and I would love to, like any citizen that wants to run, I would love to speak to them. So thank you for asking that question, and look forward to meeting with you.
Okay, sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fenger, please.
Thank you. I agree with a lot of what has already been said. However, I would add to what Ms. Gatewood was referring to in that running for office, for me personally, was very similar to some of what the mayor's already discussed and such, was about making a difference and was about representing my neighbor. And as you are volunteering with the city, is that I spent almost maybe 9-10 years volunteering in different committees here first, and it was something I had worked towards wanting to do for probably that entire time. So I understand. I think it looks very intimidating. But in the grand scheme of things, I met with all of these individuals before running to find out what it takes to run, and we're all available for that, which, as Commissioner Smith has already said. But I'm certainly, I think that one of the main items to get across is that the issue, I think, with term limits can be that once you're here, is that for me, those first 4 years went by really fast. And I think catching the pace of what those who have been here, who have already established some amazing groundwork, is getting up to speed with that, as well as then being able to, as we've done, really unite as a commission with our strategies, our vision, working with city management to move forward. It takes a little bit of time, and it would be really unfortunate that individuals up here, 3 individuals at a time or 4 of us at a time, were cut off the commission because of a term limit when we're still working on making those projects happen. And if, as the mayor said, if it was time for us to go, one of us to go, someone's going to show up and run, and so to let us know it's time to go. So I think those opportunities are there every time there's an election, and I think most everyone welcomes that competition because that's how we all got here. So I think the talent is here, and it is very difficult to just get all of that done in one term or even say in 2 terms. You just don't know how much it will take. But thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Smith.
Also, kind of what Beverly talked about was the issue of, getting out to the community. Henry, this question's to you more. I kind of wanted to do maybe a diversity and inclusion advisory board, and making that where citizens can get on there to come up with ideas that we can get out to those communities that we don't hear. And I'd like to know what staff is doing to get into talk about diversity and inclusion in our city, past what we have, if you could.
Yeah, just very briefly. We talked about diversity and inclusion at the last annual City Commission retreat, and staff has re-engaged on that issue, particularly in the context of everything that's going on in the world right now. We realize that we need to really put a focus on that. So we are going to be reaching out to folks in the community. We do need to get more people involved. We agree with you completely on that, whether it's a specific board or some other way. We'll be bringing some ideas to the City Commission and having that discussion with you over the next few months.
And one of my goals when I first ran was to get some youth on the board, and now I'm not the young guy even close anymore. So I was much younger then. Well, not much. I was younger then. But I think that there were 4 commissioners that were all born in the same year when I first ran for City Commission, and one of my reasons to run was because I was representing an age group that wasn't represented, and I think that it's important to. And Beverly, I don't know the answer as far as how we get to get a more diverse group that wants to be in city government in the city of Largo. I think that our staff is doing a lot of really great things to try to reach out to different groups that we probably haven't reached out to enough in the past, and there's been some really great work from across the board. So if any of you all have ideas on that, please get in touch. And certainly, as Commissioner Smith and Fenger both said, when I ran for City Commission, I sat down with each of the commissioners and the mayor at the time and asked. I had a set of about 15 questions that I wanted to know about running for office, about what the job entailed, about how to be good at it. And everybody kind of had the same and different answers, and I think everybody on this board would do that with anyone that's interested in getting involved in city government and running for a commission, even if it means that they might run against them at some point. I think that we're all here for the right reason, and we encourage and welcome others to run for these seats that also are doing it for the right reasons.
Mayor, I had a comment, if you don't mind.
Please.
I just wanted to say that I think there's always more that we can do, but I think we do a lot. And when you mentioned cultivating younger potential candidates, the introduction, Commissioner Robinson and his work on the Youth Council, the Citizens Academy, the opportunities to sit on different advisory boards, and frankly, as several commissioners have mentioned, sitting down with people who express any interest at all at running for office. I think we're pretty open about that. We talk with people that we might not necessarily agree with on issues, but here's the mechanics of what you got to do to get elected or, wind up on an advisory board or any of those things. So there's always room for improvement, but I think we're pushing government out more than we used to, and I think it's a good thing. Thank you.
Commissioner Holmes, did you have something as well?
No, I was petting the cat.
Okay.
So do we have a consensus not to put the term limits on the ballot in November?
I believe so.
Yes.
Okay. Then if we're done with that discussion, Mayor, I did want to go back because I did find the vote from 2014, if I could.
Oh, please.
Provide that to you. So those who voted against the amendment to increase the lease to 10 years was 11,761. And those who voted for it were 10,219. So it lost by roughly 1,500 votes. I suppose the one other question that lost in 2014 lost by 7,000 votes. So this one was closer. But still lost by 1,500 votes.
Well, do you know what the other question was?
Yeah, the other question was a question about the administration of the budget.
I remember it. Yeah, it was about the size of expenditures that had to come to the commission. Is that correct?
Right, and the ones that had to be adopted by ordinance or by resolution.
Okay.
The other thing about that, those numbers that Alan just gave, it's a demonstration of very low voter turnout.
Well, thank you. I think you have the direction that you need for the ordinance. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Cool.
Okay, and once again, thank you to all the folks that that helped us with the charter review this year, and hopefully we'll see some folks again in 10 years for another charter review. Next up is, I think I'm going to recess the City Commission meeting and convene the CRA meeting for one item.
Yes, sir. Good evening. This item is an informational one, and it's an update it's an update for all of you on the 15-year review for West Bay Drive District by Pinellas County. On July 21st, Pinellas County Board of County Commissioners will consider accepting the 15-year review and will be asking for new conditions to be approved by you as the CRA board. These conditions are that the city will amend the West Bay Drive CRD plan to include the spending of county TIF funds for current and new projects that are identified in the 2 exhibits that were attached to tonight's memo. The second one is that we accept that the county's annual contributions to the West Bay Drive TIF Trust Fund will not exceed the contributions being made by the city for the remainder of the district's term. That's currently the case because our millage rate is higher than the county's. So we're in a good position with that now. And they've agreed that they will not seek to retroactively recover any monies from the past years when the county paid more into our trust fund than the city. Staff feels that both of these conditions are acceptable. However, we need to make sure you were aware of the 2 conditions prior to the July 21st Board of County Commissioners meeting, and also to get any direction from you. Following the 21st meeting and subsequent approval, staff will begin to follow the process of amending the plan to incorporate the planned capital expenditures identified in the resolution exhibits. I'd be happy to answer questions. Director Strickland is also online, and as well, the city attorney has also reviewed the county's resolutions, and we're all available for any of your questions.
Thank you. Any questions concerning the West Bay Drive 15-year review?
No.
Very good. Good job. You covered it all.
All right.
That was a very good report. The paper report as well as yours, but Well, thank you, Ed. At this time, I will adjourn the CRA meeting and reconvene as a city commission for items from the dais, the virtual dais, I guess. Mr. Zimmett.
I have nothing further tonight. Thank you.
And Vice Mayor Hulk.
Yes, I just wanted to thank Kara and the RPA staff for putting on probably, I don't know, I love our Christmas parade, but this parade was just, there was something about this weekend that was just amazing. It was great seeing all those people lined up and the families and the children, and that was without throwing candy or beads or anything. They were just so excited. Carrie did an awesome job getting it out there. The attendance was fantastic, I thought. And then I read some of the reports of the people that were online watching it, and several people sent me videos. It was just really great. They did a fantastic job, and I just wanted to thank Kara and Joan for everything that they did, and the rest of their staff. And also, I really want to thank the members of the charter review. I'm sure that this is something that I know that they spent a lot of time, energy, their thoughts, lots of discussions. And I just want them to know we really appreciate them doing this and giving up their time for the city, and look forward to seeing them around the city and expressing and asking questions. I mean, it was great. Beverly, you did a fantastic job presenting. Mr. Roland, it was good hearing from you too. And look forward to seeing everybody around the city, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Commissioner Carroll.
I have nothing tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith.
Just tomorrow is our Forward Pinellas meeting at 1 o'clock. It's a Zoom meeting. I'd also like to thank Kara and the RPA department. They did an awesome job at the drive-by salute. And my partner took some really good photos and posted them on Facebook. So it was really nice to see all the families standing on the line and respecting each other's distance, and those who wanted to wear masks or needed to wear masks was very appreciative. Also, I'd like to thank Leslie for stepping up to serve as my member on the planning board. I look forward to working with her and on that. Also, with it being the Parks and Recreation Month, during this pandemic, like Joan was talking about, the parks were really welcoming to me. My partner and I picked, when we couldn't do anything, we went out to the parks and we now do it once a week, where we go out to each park and just see nature. And the preserve is an awesome place to go out to and take a look. And Nagao, oh my God, the turtles and the nature. So the citizens, please take advantage of this and go out and see Largo Parks. Be proud of your city, of what's there, and enjoy nature. And thank you for Parks and Recs. That's a lot.
Thank you. Commissioner Fenger.
Thank you. I just have a question that I'm going to guess that City Manager Schubert might update us on if there were any other discussions today from the county's commission's meeting, or as you were saying, I think that there was another call regarding COVID, hospitalization availability, things of that sort. So I was just looking forward to hearing that this evening. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that he was on that call this morning, or earlier today, because I heard him chime in that Largo's on board with a couple things. So I'm sure that he will fill us in just a few minutes. Commissioner Holmes.
As you know, I'm on the Community Standards Board, also known as Code Enforcement. And at the last Code Enforcement hearing, actually, this is no reflection on them. This is something, though, that we really need to address with them. There was 4 cases that came before the Code Board. And between the 4 cases, if you add it together, the fines totaled $1,733,150. That was 4 cases. The city settled it for $1,950. Now, they had good reason behind why they did this, but Tracy said that they have hundreds of of cases backlogged with code enforcement. And I don't know what we can do to help the Henry. Is there anything we can do to help them? I mean, this is really, almost $2 million, and you settled it for less than $2,000.
Yeah, first of all, I think that's an issue we are going to bring to the City Commission at a future work session for some policy guidance. Old cases, and many of those we're now addressing with an attorney we have under contract that we're pursuing foreclosure on some of those particularly egregious cases that have been around for many, many years.
Well, a question, Alan. How are we doing with the magistrate? Is that resolving some of these cases?
Yeah, so, and Carol can probably speak to this better than I can, but so some cases we take to the Code Enforcement Board and some cases we take to the magistrate. So yes, we're getting cases taken care of. The cases that you're talking about, like Henry said, most of these cases are ones that have been there for a long period of time and never got corrected for one reason or another. Typically, they're properties that are pretty derelict, and we just had a difficult time. So those are the ones that are being turned over, in most cases, for the foreclosure lawyer to try to get some resolution on those.
And in many cases, the fines have accrued to the point that they exceed the value of the property.
Oh, yeah. Well, some of these, that was the case. I mean, some of these fines were $500,000, $650,000. It was kind of crazy, but we really need to do something with this. The code board's doing the best they can, but I think we need to get them some help. That's all.
Thank you. I know that we've talked about this briefly before, and I'm happy to see that we're going to be discussing it. And I do think that we should consider an ordinance that would limit code liens on a property to the value of the property. I know that one of our neighbors to the north was in the news for a while for a $150,000 house with a $400,000 lien on it, and so I wouldn't want to be in that position. So I look forward to talking about that in the future, kind of wrapping our heads around what's going on and how we can improve it.
Well, you've got one more aspect on that with these title companies. I don't know if there's anything that we can do when someone's going for closing and the title company doesn't pick up the fact that there is a code enforcement lien against the property. I don't know how you can get around that. I think we're the plaintiff. So I don't know, Alan. How could you work that out, Alan? Is there any way you could do it legally? Yeah.
So, I mean, the title company usually comes into play when somebody's buying the property.
Right.
And do a title. So that'll happen. It happens two ways. I mean, title companies do make mistakes, but sometimes when people buy these distressed properties and they buy them for cash, they don't get title work done to save money. And so that's an issue. It's also when they buy the property from in a tax sale, a lot of times they don't get a title search done. And then that becomes a problem because then they get stuck with this property that has liens on it because they haven't done their due diligence. So it's kind of all of those. Our approach, I know, as we work with city staff is mostly is that our first goal is to gain compliance, not necessarily a financial benefit. So that's typically the way we approach these. What happens is most people, and you look at the percentages, the code board, or they go to the special magistrate, end up coming into compliance. It's those few percentage of people that, for one reason or another, never come into compliance that you hear about and you see these $1 million liens or hundreds of thousands. And one difference with us and the city to our north is the manner in which we enforce those or try to collect on those numbers. I mean, we aren't as aggressive as they have been, which is why I think they were in the paper. That's an approach that that's the approach that we have always tried to take, and that starts with the city manager and with Carol.
Mr. Carroll, go ahead.
Yeah, I know this is going to be coming up for a work session. I just listening to the comments and having worked with the code board on this, We also should keep in mind that the neighbors of these derelict properties have often endured those derelict properties for a long time. And we need to find a mechanism that just because somebody wants to make a cash deal or they don't do their due diligence, that they kind of get away with the property, being in that condition for so long. And also a way to, whatever fines that come out of these sorts of things, with compliance being the number one goal, but whatever money that generates in fines should be reinvested in our community. And I know from speaking to property owners about construction projects and derelict homes that have been in their neighborhood for years, sometimes decades, that we should find a better way to get those things resolved. That's for another discussion, but I just thought I'd chime in. Thanks.
Well, actually, Code Board right now is, Henry, didn't they just turn over $200,000 from fines? It was right around that, and they were dispersing it to businesses that needed the relief from the COVID.
Yeah, that's where we got some of the monies to provide business assistance in the community.
Yeah.
And we're going to have a proposal in for the budget for next year that, well, it's out now, but that would include taking some of those fine revenues and, as Commissioner Carroll said, turning them back into the community to provide assistance.
I think those funds, Commissioner Holmes, came from the foreclosure program that
Yeah, and I think one of them just came, they settled a case with us for what, $104,000, something like that. That was a big chunk of it.
So
yes.
That was one that Mr. Schofield and I negotiated. They actually approached us to settle it.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Robinson.
Thanks. I just wanted to thank the commission for my appointment to the PSTA board. Looking forward to serving. I also would like to say thank you to this commission for the appointment of Valerie Hibbard to the FAB. She's very much looking forward to serving on that board, and I think will be a valuable asset. And then lastly, kudos to everybody in the city on our staff that participated in the parade and put the parade together on the 4th. It was fantastic. The mayor and myself and Commissioner Holt, or Vice Mayor Holt, all rode in the same float. I guess we're going to go with the float. It was a float. So it was a good time. We all had a really good time. Commissioner Holmes was on his motorcycle for while it lasted, and Commissioner Smith was attended as well. And we all had a really good time. It was great seeing the people that came out, and the kids enjoyed it. I know the staff really appreciated the thank you signs and some of the other things that were out there. So I went well above any expectation I had for what we were going to see out there. So I really hope to see it. Maybe we can make that some sort of an annual tradition. And it is not better than the Christmas parade. I'm just going to put that out.
It's different.
It's different. It's apples and oranges, correct.
It's warmer.
So, yeah, a little warmer for sure. So that's all I had to make.
Definitely warmer.
Thank you. I was going to echo the comments about the parade. I thought it was great. I thought it was really, we hit so many, the route was good. We hit a ton of neighborhoods. There was so much participation. I mean, we went through some neighborhoods where every front yard, the family was out there cheering us on and just waving flags and happy to see us. So it was really cool. I don't know what, if somebody went door to door before. I don't think they did, but I don't know how they got everybody out on their front yards, but great job. And I switched my background to Central Park for Parks and Recreation Month, just in time. I'd like to just bring up a thought. I think we talked about this a few years ago, but I know that right now we're a little bit more casual, kind of work session dress. I spoke with Mr. Schubert briefly about kind of pitching the idea of having the 3 hottest summer months, June, July, and August, kind of work session casual, even for the city commission meetings. So we're not putting on suits when it's 98 degrees out with 98% humidity. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, and you guys can think about it, and we'll maybe talk about it next meeting or something. I think as long as we're still virtual, we're going to have work session attire anyway. But I think when we get back in person, if it's during the month of August, June, July, and August it would be my proposal to be a little bit more casual for the summer months. So think about that. I want to ask you what you feel about it today. There was a comment earlier, I think during the first citizens comment, about asking the city to require masks. So to be clear, the county requires masks, but they exempted city facilities. However, our policy is that city facilities require masks. So I'm not sure what else, but I just want to make that clear that as a city, for our facilities, we do require masks to be worn. And that's for our employees that are in proximity to somebody. You're in your own office working on paperwork, you don't have to wear a mask. And then of course the rest of the businesses in the city kind of fall under the county ordinance. Lastly, I wanted to just thank the staff. I know that you all wanted to be able to see everybody with this meeting. I know that Diane, Courtney's at home today, so Diane is kind of running a little bit of it by herself, and Preston and everybody else, and I don't even know what that department's called, but the folks that do the technical TV stuff, they're behind the scenes making this run smooth as well. So I'd like to thank them for putting this together. I just didn't think that it would make sense for us to all be sitting in the commission chambers with masks on trying to have a meeting. So I think this worked pretty well tonight, and I'd like to thank staff for helping us with that. Mr. Schubert, have anything?
Yeah, just briefly, the county administrator did organize a conference call today for all the cities and county staff to discuss a few issues regarding the COVID pandemic. And there were basically two parts of the conference call. The first one was just the response to the pandemic. The short version is the county at this point is staying the course. As the mayor said, that the Board of County Commissioners did enact a countywide requirement that people wear masks in indoor spaces that are open to the public. The sheriff is also on the call. The sheriff and county administration, and it seemed like everybody else felt real good about the compliance level that we're achieving in businesses and other places around the county. They felt that the 4th of July weekend went much better than the Memorial Day weekend did, that there was a lot more mask wearing, a lot more social distancing, that it worked out, as best as can be expected. The county is continuing to monitor, the caseload here in the county. They are in regular contact with the healthcare providers. One of the major concerns always is capacity within the hospitals, both for just general hospital beds and maybe even more importantly, ICU capacity. So again, that's something that they follow very closely. Also follow very closely the EMS call volume. The other night, we actually had a 3-hour period where when the fire department responded with a transport capable unit, they made the transport rather than Sunstar because there were so many calls being serviced by the system. But luckily that was just for a 3-hour period. So while EMS calls now have returned to pretty much normal levels, so far they're still for the most part able to handle it. The second part of the call dealt with CARES Act funds. CARES Act is something that was approved by the federal government. Part of that legislation involved the distribution of a considerable sum of money to the states and to counties and cities with a population of 500,000 or greater. Therefore, Pinellas County was one of the recipients of a pretty significant amount of money. I don't remember the exact amount. I think it's a number approaching $200 million. The money can be used to provide direct assistance to businesses, to individuals and families, and also for health mitigation purposes. And all those expenses have to be COVID related. The county is going to be rolling out their phase 2 of all these programs here in the very near future. One of the things that they're looking at, and they're going to be surveying the cities, local governments here in Pinellas County, is what our needs are. But some of this money could be used to reimburse the cities for their share of the cost of COVID-related expenses that are not covered by FEMA. So many of our COVID-related expenses, like materials we've had to purchase over time that we're encountering, that money will be eligible for FEMA reimbursement within, of course, certain parameters. But FEMA reimburses approximately 88% of the expense. So the remaining 12%, the county is looking at potentially reimbursing us using CARES Act funds. So again, they're going to be distributing a survey to all the cities here, I guess in the next few days to get their arms around what the real needs are. What they'll be asking for is our expenses to date, and then what projected expenses we have through the end of the calendar year, because the CARES Act funding does expire on December 31st. So those are very quickly the substance of the call this afternoon. If anyone has any questions, I'd be glad to address them.
Commissioner Smith.
It's not related to that, Henry, but it's another question outside of that. It's the RFP has that gone out or looking at has come in for the Bayhead and the basketball courts, looking at that?
It has not come in yet. I'm not sure if it's gone out or not.
Okay, and when it does, are we including the idea of having basketball courts on that facility?
Yes, we're going to have that evaluation with the architect to see exactly what facilities we could put on the site. Yes.
Okay, and just to inform the public is that the Largo Library through the county is providing masks for citizens that need a mask. That's all.
I wanted to mention. Go ahead.
That's a distribution program the county organized, and I believe most of the libraries in Pinellas County are participating in that.
I wanted to mention that on that call today, the Pinellas County Sheriff was talking a little bit about the mask ordinance, and he felt it was important to point out that there's no requirement that you have to wear a mask if you're able to maintain 6 feet distance between you and other people. And there's no requirement that a business enforce people to wear a mask in order to come into the business. There are businesses that have very sparse attendance coming in and out, and people can go in there without being close to other people. So they're getting a lot of calls for enforcement, and they said the vast majority that go out and there's no real violation. There's also no requirement that businesses put signage up, although certainly they encourage it. And I'll just add on to that conversation. Stay away from people. This isn't for you guys, although you should do it too, but this is for everybody that's out there going to watch this. Stay away from folks that you don't know or that, not in your family. If you can't, wear a mask and wash your hands regularly. A lot of people keep forgetting to remind people to wash your hands, but that's the best defense against catching this for yourself. Mask helps other people keep from being contaminated if you're sick yourself. So those are just my kind of pointers. Any other thing to add on? If not, meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much, and you all have a great week. We'll see you on Friday. Don't forget that. Meeting's adjourned.